Hi, it's Dr. Lori, and I'm back with more selling tips for you about selling all different kinds of stuff. You know me from on the PhD Antiques Appraiser, and I want you to learn how to succeed. I've been helping people sell for top dollar for a long time, and I want to help you. First tip, right off the bat, research your object. You're going, of course I research my object, Dr. Lori. I have you help me identify my object. I research. Okay, I want you to research your object. You can't sell something if you don't know what it is. Now, there are people out there who are trying to sell things when they don't know what it is. That happens all the time. But basically, you have to know how old it is. You have to ask who made it. You want to ask some of the harder questions too. And there are a lot of those questions, you know. Was it part of a set? Was it ever repaired? You got to really look at an object. You've got to see, are there different nails in it? Are the holes where a nail would be? Is that a different hole? Is the hole bigger than what the nail is now? These kinds of things. You really got to look. You've got to investigate that object, you know, like you were trying to put, you know, a private investigator on like that boyfriend who's cheating on you. You know, that's what you got to do. You've got to really look at this object and really ask questions of it. Where was this object between the date it was made and today? You know, where has it been in its quote-unquote life as an object? You want to know if it was repaired. You want to know if it's special in some way. You want to know if it was in a museum. Was it featured in a movie? Was it in the media? Where was this object, and why is this object special in some way? This specialness, if you will be really important for you to be able to market it, and you be able to create a listing if you're trying to sell it online or sell it anywhere else. Okay. I want you to do something that we all said in art history, which was compare and contrast. Look at your object and then look at other objects. So this tip is all about how your object is similar or dissimilar from other objects, okay? So ask yourself, what's similar? Well, it's made by this particular maker. It's a piece of majolica. It's a ceramic. What's similar of your object to other objects, and preferably to other high-priced objects? And then what's dissimilar? What makes it really great? What makes it something that's so unusual and terrific about my object that's different from others? You know, so, you know, just because someone is selling an object at a particular price or a particular list price, right? So maybe it's a low list price. That doesn't mean your object has to be at a low list price too. So compare your object with other objects. You know, why are some sneakers selling for $35 and other sneakers are selling for $35,000? And this is a really good point, and it reminds me of a story. So, you know, I've got my sneaker, right? So my sneaker is worth what? Whatever my sneaker is worth. But if my sneaker is Dr. Lori's sneaker, and this particular dirt on this sneaker is more important for some reason, then you've got an example of how you can basically highlight your particular piece. So it reminds me of a story, and it's a story from, I was on a TV shoot in Hollywood, and I was with that person, that guy who actually has the hottest sourcing and selling sneaker site online. So he sources these special sneakers, and then he sells them for tens of thousands of dollars. Cool guy, nice guy, engaged guy. And it was interesting to me because I sat with him and I said, well, okay, you're getting these sneakers, and sure, they're from celebrities or not, but tell me, the way you're going to sell these particular sneakers is pretty interesting to me. And he said, one of the things that I always do, Dr. Lori, is I try to highlight, of course, what's the best thing about my sneakers. And I'm confident in those particular things. So what you want to think about is you want to think about why your piece is better. You have to find that, though. You have to find why it's better, and then you have to be confident in why it's better, and you have to share that confidence, right? So this is important for when you sell anything, particularly when you're trying to list something online and highlight its, you know, accentuating the positives. I also want you to, this next tip, I also want you to find what's useful about it. So what's useful, or what your object really is like. So you're saying, well, what do you mean? Sometimes you're looking at an object and you just glaze over what's important about the object. So I want you really to look at it. I want you to look at not just marks and, oh, is it signed, and that kind of easy stuff. I want you to actually look at the piece. You know, there's a reason why an Andrew Wyeth painting is better than paintings by some other artists, for example. There's a reason for it, and it has to do with understanding how the piece was made. So understanding what the process is. People always say, Dr. Lori, you know so much about so much. Well, yeah, but you have to know how it got to that place. Sure, I know what quality looks like. I can recognize quality, and you probably can too. But if you know how everything is made, if you know how these particular pieces are and how they should look, you can highlight those particular types of looks. And I want you not to glaze over these pieces. I want you to look at these pieces and have an understanding of what they truly are. You know, do you have a beautiful thin piece of paper porcelain that's very hard to make because the majority of them, of course, explode in the kiln? Well, do you have that? Then maybe you need to highlight that it's high quality manufactured. That's important. So point out origin, collection history, who was it owned by before, the background of a piece. Of course, condition, but also key elements that place your piece at the head of the pack. Then I want you to look for the high and the low. So when you are trying to list something, particularly when you're selling online, I want you to search for the high and the low. So look for what differs from the highest valued piece that's sold and the lowest valued piece that's sold, like yours. And then, of course, how is it different from your piece? So if the highest valued piece like yours, you know, say it's a piece of pottery just like this and you have one like it too, and one sold for $1 million and one sold for $1, how is yours different? Is yours more like the $1 million one because it's made by the same maker? Is yours more like the $1 one because it's not in good condition? Figure out where you are in between the high and the low, right? So, you know, it's like the old-fashioned pros and cons list, right? It's like the old-fashioned pros and cons list, right? How is it better? How is it worse? So you want to think about those types of things when you are basically looking at this. So look for the high and look for the low in terms of a sales record, and look for the sales record that sold high and sold low, okay? Usually as an appraiser, you just get rid of the very, very high or the very, very low because those two are usually the flukes. It's usually somewhere in the middle of the market is that you want to be. So you want to highlight what's the best aspects of your object, and you want to, of course, downplay the worst aspects of your object when you're listing them. Then I want you to think about this tip. Group your goods. So group what you have. So I want you to recognize the patterns that you know of in your object. So that means if you have a particular object that you're trying to sell, I want you to recognize what the patterns are about it. And I don't mean the pattern like, oh, it's the Nancy pattern from Royal Dalton, or oh, it's some other pattern. I want you to recognize what's unique and also what's common about your object. And sometimes you do that by putting your object next to other objects. So I want you to think about considering selling your objects as a group. Now, you're like, well, Dr. Laura, you always tell me not to get rid of sets and to keep sets intact. Yes, I'm not talking about a set. I'm talking about a group. Groups might be, in fact, similar objects that, of course, can be related in some way. So if you can group your objects together, you might be able to sell a bunch of objects all at once. So that's usually good. Sometimes you can actually sell them even more because you're creating a collection for the buyer. The buyer actually says, oh, I don't have to run around and find 1 million of these. I've got my collection all done, basically. So recognize those patterns. So are the items that you're selling better in a group? And a lot of times they would be. Sometimes they're just small little inexpensive items. If you group them together, all of a sudden they look better. They look better in terms of quality, and they look better or more attractive to a buyer because they're saying, hey, I get a lot of them and I'm still not spending all that much. So when you're considering grouping your items, I want you to group them in these ways. By type. Do you have kitchen collectibles? Do you have patchwork quilts? Do you have costume jewelry? So by type, right? By color. You all know your colors. You remember the color wheel, second grade, you know, yellow and blue make green, you know, color. So you want to do it by color, and you want to do it by colors that are popular now. So you want to think about that. What's popular now? And those colors are going to be sort of at the highlight there. The other colors that you want to think about are those colors that are always matched up or go together, right? Like blue and white is a very, very typical color pair for, of course, the antiques world and for collectors. So think about that. Also think about maker, you know. Do you group by maker? Oh, we have all these different objects. They're of different dates, but they're by the same maker. And likewise, you could group by date. Right? So you could group by, in fact, the fact that all of these pieces are by different makers, but they're all from the 1950s or the 1970s, that kind of thing. You can also group by set, like, look, I've got a set. That's the easiest one. You all do that, right? Or by form. I have 12 sleigh beds, or I have 50 teacups, or whatever you might have. So think about grouping your goods. It's a very good way to attract, of course, your buyers. The other thing I want you to do when you are thinking about how you actually buy is I want you to put yourself in the buyer's seat. So use those opportunities when you're online shopping, when you are the buyer. Use those opportunities to say, hey, look, that attracted me to this particular piece. Maybe I could use that same technique when I'm trying to sell something. So think about that when you're in the buyer's seat. You want to put yourself in the buyer's seat, right? So you want to ask yourself that kind of thing. You know, what are the things on your own shopping experience that make you click? And maybe those techniques will help you when you're listing your piece, making your potential buyers to click online. And this particular tip, which is always a good one, I always say, be a silent critic. For many, many years in my career, I was an art critic, of course, and looking at exhibitions and looking at works of other people. It's very easy to be a loud critic, right? It's not easy to be a silent critic. And what I mean by a silent critic is I want you to be quiet and look around at what's happening around you, all right? So you don't have to go and say, oh, you know, you did a terrible listing online. Go and look at other people's online listings. Now, I'm not telling you to be a copycat because I hate copycats. I think people who copy are just stupid. I don't like copycats. I never did. But I want you to look and see how other people are actually listing similar objects. And a lot of you, I know you use this technique because you've told me that when on our video chats or maybe through our priority service or when you're sending in, of course, questions to my social media or the YouTube channel. So what I want you to think about when you're looking at these other listings is I want you to look at some of the things that you might say, wow, I think I can do this better, or wow, that person did this really well, I might borrow that option. So you want to think about all of these things when you are actually listing your objects. So when you're listing something online, look at what other people are doing. Don't be devoted to their list price because they may not have the right information about the list price, okay? You really want to make sure that you have correct identification, but some of the things that they might be doing, things like how they are presenting photographs, how they're talking about some of their sales practices, what are their shipping what are they doing with respect to shipping policies? Those kinds of things might help you when it comes down to actually identifying what looks like a good list, a good listing online. The other thing you really have to make sure of after you've researched your object and you've compared your objects to others, and you of course have really identified and looked for the high and also the low of your objects, you want to make sure that you remember to do these other elements that will help you to sell your object. You have to put the object in this environment where other people want it, and they want it more than they want somebody else's objects. There's a lot of competition out there, a lot. So what you have to do is you really have to look at what's going on in the market, but you also have to look at your object and try to accentuate what's best about it. Now, you want to make sure that you are honest. You want to make sure that you are properly and correctly identifying your object and showing your object, but you want to make sure that the honesty factor is always there. Also, dealing with your potential buyer, answering those questions, being on top of that. So not just putting something up there and just walking away and never helping to answer questions and to go from that. You want to think about all of those things. As you're being a silent critic and as you're putting yourself in the buyer's seat, you're going to be able to identify and list these pieces, researching your objects, and know exactly what's what. I'm Dr. Lori. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share the videos. There's more selling tips coming up. See you next time.